Hi, I'm Mike Duggan. I've been teaching restorative dentistry for over 32 years now and to over 6,000 dentists. This video shows how I do it. Real-time, mannequin-based, hands-on, point of view, and patient real. If you are a pre-dental student, an aspiring teacher, an international dentist, join me at Duggan Oral Design, dugganoraldesign.com. Okay, so just to point out again, so this tooth has an MO like you're doing now, but it does not include the central groove, does not include the pit, because those areas were not involved in decay, so we call that a slot preparation. But we're going to do the DO over here. There's already a DO on the second molar, isn't there? See that? So I'm going to do the same thing basically on the first molar here. So I'll take the 55 burr and do the normal thing. I'm going to start by making sure I'm in the middle of the contact. So I drill a hole right against the adjacent tooth, just like that. In the middle of the contact, facial-lingually, as close as I can to the adjacent tooth and about the depth of the burr. Then I'm going to do what we always do. Find the facial margin. Okay, so I know I'm going to have some clearance on the facial, so I'm going to put the margin there, and I'm going to find the lingual margin with the burr right next to the adjacent tooth. So I've been showing you each individually on your typodonts how this is done for the preps that you're doing. Again, I'm looking so I can see how close I am to the adjacent tooth. And I nip out facial-lingually until I get, so I know I'm going to have the clearances I need. Then I'm going to cut straight in. I'll do an amalgam, so I'll cut in at a 90-degree angle. It's a little bit obtuse, but it's pretty straight, and I'm keeping the burr vertical. Okay, so now I've got my 90-degree angle, and I've got the length. So I've cut in a little bit beyond where the axial is going to be. So I'll do the same thing over here. Again, find the margin, find the angle coming in. It's still a little bit obtuse. So make sure you get a nice long straight wall, perpendicular to the surface. Now I'm ready to start here and cut all the way along the oblique ridge and just include this pit right here. There's two pits here, which is unusual, but that's the way this type of knot is. So okay, I'm going to start right here. I'm going to cut and just include that pit. So I'm looking along the direction that I want to cut. Then when I cut toward my eye, and I'm cutting in the direction I want. So again, if you want to cut some direction, look in that direction and then cut toward your eye or away from your eye, and you can't miss. So now I just included that pit, and I kept the uniform distance away from the oblique ridge. Then I'm just going to include this little area here, just leave a little roundness here, make that connect together. Then I'm going to get rid of the excess in the middle. So that's basically the occlusal outline that we're going to use before we go gingerly. So again, it's the same process that we've been using. We just didn't make an isthmus and a dovetail because there's no central groove and no place to put a dovetail. Now back to the 55 burr. As usual, we're going to go gingerly. So make sure the burr is vertical. Some of you are leaning the burr facially a lot or away from your eye a lot. So make sure you don't by checking this way. Then we're going to look down here, drill a hole where we want the axial wall, and then cut away from the facial wall toward your eye. Then we'll put the burr against the lingual wall, make sure it's vertical, get the position, then cut down that wall, drill a hole, and cut away from your eye. So now I've got the basic position of the axial and the basic definition of these internal line angles. Now all we have to do is get rid of the excess along the facial wall first, then along the lingual wall, then in the middle, steps 5, 6, and 7. Okay, so I can smooth out that gingival floor a little bit. Get rid of some excess. Again, we can't evaluate gingival clearance until we get rid of the excess at the gingival margin. Then we have a margin, then you can evaluate the clearance. Okay, if this were a composite prep, we would of course change the exit angles, but we would bevel the gingival margin. In this case, it's amalgam, so I could bevel the axial pupil line angle even like this. Okay, we're going to work on the hand instruments for developing the getting a nice straight wall all the way to the margin here. So trim off any hook that might be at the margin, sharpen the internal line angle. Use the other end of the instrument down the lingual margin and then sharpen the internal line angle over there. Use the enamel hatchet against the axial wall. Then we can place our retentive groove right here. Again, this DO requires a very definite retentive groove, especially on the facial. And then as usual, we use the distal gingival margin trimmer to angle the gingival floor so we get rid of any undermined enamel that's there. All the way to the lingual wall, and then all the way to the facial wall. Again, this just removes undermined enamel. It's not a bevel or anything like that. Hand instruments do only two things. They remove undermined enamel, they sharpen line angles in dentin. They cannot cut across the end of the enamel rods. That's why we bevel the Class 2 composite prep. We bevel the gingival margin with a burr every time. Okay, so I just noticed when I looked a little bit more carefully, I could probably trim that lingual margin a little bit more carefully from the occlusal right down to the gingival. Okay, so that's basically it for the DO. There's another one over here so you can compare those. You've got the MO or the DO over here that we did yesterday. You've got a slot prep over here you can look at. So anyway, those are things you can look at. There's even a slot prep over here on this premolar. All right, so anyway, you're free to look at my typodont any time, but at this point, so I'll take it out and put it on the ledge here. But you're free to get started on your DO as soon as you can. So finish up your MO. Everybody's getting pretty much finished. We're not finished until we use the hand instruments, right? So use the hand instruments, finish the MO, start on the DO. Okay? All right. Oops, I'll just use mine. Okay, so I did the MO over here, doing the D over here. So, okay. So finishing means finishing it with hand instruments, making nice retentive grooves and everything else, right?
I did with the hand instruments.
Ah, okay. Well, do you have any retentive groove over here on the lingual?
I did with the...
But I don't see a retentive groove. So the goal is not to use the hand instrument, the goal is to actually create a retentive groove.
So can I use for the retentive groove this burr? This one?
That's hard to use, but first we always use a hand instrument. Then we can use the burr after that. We always use a hand instrument first.
I was using...
Right, but you see, you don't, right here you don't have a wall that you can use a hand instrument against. You've got to do more with the burr first. So let's refine the margin. Do the occlusal part a little bit more cleanly. Get the angle that we want. Get the length that we want coming in. So now I have the occlusal part down a little bit better. Now we want to put the corner of the box right here. The 55 burr would make it easier, of course. Come down that wall. I'm going to get a little bit closer to that wall, define that corner. Then we're going to get rid of the excess. I'll switch over to the 55 burr so I'll show you how we actually do it. So down the corner, and then smooth the wall, get rid of the excess, all the way down to the gingival floor. So now we're starting to have a corner that's better defined. We want to have a corner that's really well defined with the burr.
I was offered to like it should be wide, that's why.
Well, but you have to define the corner well,
Okay.
with a nice flat wall from the outside in and from the top to the bottom before you try to put retentive grooves in. And over here, your wall's not quite flat enough all the way down to the gingival floor. So get rid of the excess all the way down to the gingival. Define an internal line angle that's nice and cleanly defined. Again, make a flat wall from the closer to the gingival from the outside in. Then we can start using hand instruments. So in this case, we'll use the enamel hatchet. So that's the hoe. Okay, so this is the enamel hatchet. So let's look at this corner right here. So now I can take this instrument and come down that corner. But if you don't use the burr enough first,
Okay, it will not.
then you won't have a place to put the retentive groove. And over here, I'd put the retentive groove about right here. So be more complete with your burr, and then you can be very deliberate with the hand instruments. And then you can really get a groove that works. We have to be able to see and feel the groove. Okay, now the only other thing is, let's cut a little bit straighter, parallel to the oblique ridge. So I'll find the margin, find the angle, get the length, and then cut straight from there, maybe about right here. So just come toward your eye, look in the direction you want exactly, and then everything will be a little more controllable when it comes to the position and the straightness of that wall. Anyway, pretty close. You got a little bit too deep axially over here. Your gingival clearance is reasonable. Again, you can use the gingival margin trimmer a little bit more completely, all the way to the facial lingual walls. Okay, and then over here, you could also try to put in some retentive grooves. Get rid of the excess at the gingival margin. You slipped a little bit down here, didn't you?
Yeah.
So you could try to flatten that whole area out. Practice keeping the burr vertical. So recut this whole lingual wall with the burr more vertical. And then it'll be easier to have a nicely defined corner, and I think that'll help you out. Try to define this corner a little bit. You can always practice using the burr
Straight.
to vertical, always vertical. But you always practice using the burr to define the internal line angles as well as you can. Okay?
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. But what about your facial margin? You don't really have any clearance there. In the lingual margin, you have some clearance, but that's a little bit acute. So you probably want to move the margin out facially more here. Yeah, I'll use this for now. So now I've moved the margin out facially, so now I have more clearance. And then I'm going to make the exit angle whatever I want. But make a nice flat wall coming in from that margin. So now it's 90 degrees. Then I can cut along here. But I'm going to keep an eye on the burr and make sure that the wall is no taller than the burr. So you went way down there, and then you lean the burr this way too. So the direction you're looking is going to make a huge difference on, how much control you have. I'll get a little more clearance facially while I'm changing your exit angle. So you start by moving the margin. Once we move the margin, then we can cut inward from that margin and create a different exit angle. So now we have more of a 90-degree angle. Even though we got more clearance, it's a better angle, not suggesting that we have undermined enamel. Now we can put the corner of the box something like here. Okay, obviously with a sharper burr. 55 burr, come down these corners, and then use a 55 burr to get rid of the excess along that wall and along this wall all the way to the margins. Now that we have more clearance, we can bring the burr all the way to the margins without having to worry about hitting the adjacent tooth. Notice how much clearance you have gingerly. It's like 1.5.
Yeah.
Why'd you go so deep gingerly? So remember what we were discussing earlier? People tend to go too deep gingerly when they've already gone too deep pulpily.
Yeah.
Okay, well, don't do that. First of all, don't go too deep pulpily, but second of all, never go too deep gingerly. You might not have an axial wall, but at least you haven't overextended the gingival margin. Anyway, finish it up with the 55 burr. Okay? All right? Will you just send the patient home and say, I'm sorry, but it's gone and now you need to go too?
And change the face.
You got to fix it, right? Okay, so let's fix it. Now, maybe in a patient, you had to make it this big. So when you say it's too wide, what do you really mean? Can you be more specific?
Right. So I extended buccally a lot because I started I started here.
Well, let's just figure out what you mean when you say overextended or too wide. You mean too wide facial-lingually?
Yeah.
Yeah, so your clearances are way too much facially and lingually, but maybe you had to do that because of decay.
Okay.
Who knows? But anyway, you know, wherever the margin is, that's a very obtuse exit angle, isn't it, on both sides? So if we're going to do an amalgam, which I'm encouraging you to do, well, let's make it 90 degrees. So we come back to the facial margin, but we're going to change the exit angle coming inward. So I'm just pretending that I'm seeing this on a patient. And now we have to make a prep that's actually going to work. That is our responsibility, isn't it? So now we're going to try to find a nice 90-degree angle at the margin and a long straight wall coming in with the burr vertical. Same thing on the lingual. Now keep the burr more vertical. See, you undercut that wall a lot. When people don't have the burr vertical, it usually makes it much more difficult to get the prep to work out right. So come straight in from the margin. Now we still have a little bit of a bevel there, so I'm going to have to move the margin out actually a little farther. You can't have a bevel at the margin for amalgam. So find the margin, find the angle, get the length coming in. Okay, still a little bit of a bevel there. Clean margin, nice angle, good length, make the curve. Now we're ready to find the corners of the box here. And the axial should be perpendicular to this wall here. And then over here, and the axial should be perpendicular to that wall. So down the wall, and then away from that wall, and down this wall, and away from this wall. So that'll start us with the shape of the axial wall.
So I see that the width of my gingival seat is always too much.
Well, it should be about here, and you're in about here. But again, if you don't have your facial lingual walls so that you can make the axial perpendicular to them, then the axial shape is not going to work out. And by the way, you have a lot of excess at the gingival margin, right? I could even break it away. Make sure that's gone before you evaluate your gingival clearance so that you can see the clearance. Now up here, I would have wanted to cut straight from there following the oblique ridge like this. Okay, so again, when you find the facial margin, find the angle, get the length, then follow the oblique ridge into the distal lingual groove. Look in the direction you want to cut. This is how you get the outline to work out fine on these DOs. You got to be looking that direction so you can see if you deviate toward the oblique ridge. That's just what you did. So be careful about that. Okay, so get rid of the excess along these walls and along the gingival and see where you are. But, you know, we could make this work in a patient, whereas before that just wasn't going to work at all. So again, we treat it like a patient. So if you mess it up, you got to unmess it up. Okay? Oh, okay. Okay, so you never continued. So I did this for you. I established your axial wall and your internal line angles, and I said go ahead and remove the excess.
I feel finished that.
But you didn't continue.
I started with the DO.
Yeah, but you had 5 more minutes to learn something crucial.
Okay, I'll finish that right now.
So I set you up with the opportunity to learn how to get rid of the excess when the excess is really easy to see and really clearly defined, and showed you how to keep the burr vertical when you did it. So yeah, definitely don't want to miss that learning opportunity. Okay, so the DO over here, you notice that you're really shallow in these walls here, aren't you?
Yeah.
Now your facial margin, the clearance is okay, you're pretty obtuse. Normally we're going to be a little deeper pulpally right from the very beginning. We're going to use the 330 burr and drill a hole at the adjacent tooth, but make it the height of the burr. But yeah, when we find the margin, then we adjust the angle. So if we want a 90-degree angle, we adjust it. With the burr vertical, we adjust the angle until it's 90 degrees. Then what do? We cut along the oblique ridge, looking the way that we want to cut, right? So this is where we would have cut. So see the way you deviated up into the oblique ridge?
Yeah.
That's because you weren't looking in this direction. So really find the facial margin and the angle and the length. Then you can start there and just follow the distal lingual groove, follow the oblique ridge. But you can't follow it unless you're looking along the ridge, which is what I'm doing right now. So you'll be totally in control as long as you're looking along the ridge and cutting toward your eye and away from your eye. Now lingually, you have no clearance. So why are you going gingival if you haven't finished the occlusal part of the lingual wall? So make sure that you find the margin and then cut the angle inward. Then make the smooth curve to join the isthmus. Then you can find the corner of the box. Then get rid of the excess along that lingual wall, and you'll be fine. And by the way, make sure you're looking this way so you know when you're hitting the adjacent tooth, okay?
Yeah.
You're still tempted to look down the axis, and that will never work. Okay, so get rid of the excess on the lingual and then the gingival, angle the gingival floor. Put in some retentive grooves, and you'll be in reasonable shape. But again, each step, as soon as you learn how to know that you finished it well, then the rest of the prep gets easier. Okay? Cool.
So I think it's yours.
Oh yeah, thank you. Here I am again, like a bad penny.
I'm still working on the outline.
Okay, so that's where everybody's having trouble. So, but you're going gingerly, right?
No, a little.
Yeah, you are going gingerly. And so when you go gingerly, that means you're happy with your occlusal outline.
No, I'm not.
Well, then why are you going gingerly? All right. So let's get happy with the occlusal outline. So actually I go back. Yeah, I will use this spur. So let's do what we would have done before we went gingerly, and that is find your facial margin, which would be about out here, but see, you've got all that excess there. So when you find the facial margin, you're going to look this way and then find the margin. So you'll be overextended, but then you cut in 90 degrees. But I'm going to cut in 90 degrees, but I'm going to be a little deeper than you are. But over here, this is where the lingual margin should be, right? So you're trying to go gingerly when your lingual wall is here instead of being way over here. So learn how to look this way so that you can move the margin lingually as far as you need to. But again, this is what we do. We nip out until we get the clearance. See the difference? You were here and I put it here. But you were afraid to hit the adjacent tooth. I didn't have to be afraid to hit the adjacent tooth because I can see if I am. Then I'm going to cut from the margin inward. And that's, of course, no threat to the adjacent tooth because we're cutting away from it. So find the margin, find the angle, get the length. And then we're going to cut along the oblique ridge. But of course, this wall needs to be about 1.5 millimeters tall, and yours is about 0.5, and you need to extend into the distal lingual groove. So look this way, so you know where you're going. You just cut toward your eye. So look along the oblique ridge, look along the distal lingual groove, and cut right toward your eye. So see how easy that is to get that? And then your wall height now is about 1.5 millimeters tall in both of those areas. You're pretty close. So now we're under control. And then when you go gingerly, put a corner about right here with your 55 burr and about right over here. But now you're ready to go gingerly because we can put corners against the finished facial lingual walls. Okay, so use a 55 burr, use those corners, get rid of the excess, go gingerly 7 steps at a time. Okay, all right. Oops. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, we got a little problem on that facial wall. You got 2 different margins and angles. And lingual wall, you've got a very acute angle without quite enough clearance yet. And you're trying to make the box, but you're not close to where the lingual wall is. Let's just move the lingual wall lingually. We need to redo that. Let's go lingually. We'll move the margin lingually until we get some clearance. We'll cut inward at a 90-degree angle from that margin. But we're kind of running out of tooth structure to cut. There's a missing cusp here. Okay? Now facially, we're going to have to move the margin all the way out to here. Okay, because you've already gone out that far. That's where the margin's going to be. And from that margin we cut straight in. And adjust the angle however we want it. But that's where you put the margin, so that's where you have to make it. Okay, and then we would have started here and cut parallel to the oblique ridge like this.
So I put it a little bit more.
Well, that's a significant amount. That's not just a little bit.
More.
You overextended into the and through the oblique ridge. So look the way I am now, and you can keep that wall, that margin, farther from the oblique ridge and protect the oblique ridge. You cut all the way across the top. And then you didn't preserve this area right in here. Now when we go gingerly, now that you have this wall nice and flat at the angle you want, now we can find the corner and cut away from that wall and start the shape of the axial there. Of course, use the 55er, get rid of the excess here. And then the corner of the box on the lingual side would be near the wall there. So put the burr right against that wall and then cut away from that wall. Okay, and then use the 55er, get rid of the excess along this wall. Just match the gingival part of the wall to the occlusal part. Now that we got the occlusal part the way we want it, all you have to do is match the gingival part to the occlusal part and you'll be fine. Okay, and you already have enough gingival clearance, so once you get all those walls, that excess cleaned off, then finish it up, put a couple retentive grooves in. Okay, you ended up with a very acute angle over here on your MO. See that?
Need to make it obtuse a little bit, right?
Well, no, we want to make a 90-degree angle if it's amalgam, but we can't have an acute angle, so we have to move the margin and recut that angle inward. So now we have a 90-degree angle with a new margin. Now you see the hook that you had? That's that triangular shape. That's all undermined enamel there. So those are the things that we watch out for. So make sure you do the occlusal part. Then when you go gingivaly, again, match the dental part to the occlusal part. Then you end up with a flat wall all the way from the occlusal to the gingival and from the margin inward. So that works a lot better. It'd be nice if you're doing composite prep because you could include this damaged area in the bevel. Okay, but for the amalgam prep, you're kind of out of luck. All right. Thank you. Okay, not too happy with this one, huh?
No, I don't know what I have made.
Well, let's get your head on anyway. At least we can be happy that your patient does have a head.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, let's see. Okay, there we go. Okay, so we talked about that one, so you're working on the D over here. Okay, well, nothing to be too happy about, right? So we have to develop a strategy for what to do about this. Now, whenever we fix something or change something, we always change the occlusal outline first.
Okay.
Don't worry about the box until you've got the occlusal outline form fixed. So you see you have a big problem out here on the facial margin and the facial exit angle, right? So we got to fix that first. That means first of all we find a new margin. So we always find the margin before we do the angle, obviously. You can't find the exit angle until we have an exit. So I'm going to have to move out facially quite a bit to get rid of all this undermined enamel, because this cut right here undermined all that enamel. So I go back to the occlusal and I'm just finding a facial margin, a new facial margin, not based on clearance, but based on getting rid of the undermined enamel that we had. So clean margin, farther extended, but 90 degrees coming in. So find the margin, find the angle, get the length. Then we can cut from here all the way along the oblique ridge, following the distal lingual groove, about right here.
So I have cut the cut.
Well, you know, what you've cut is the oblique ridge.
Oh.
Not tremendously, but you should have been more like here.
Okay.
But you'll always control the position relative to the oblique ridge if you're always looking this direction, the way I am right now. Okay, then you can see that you're cutting parallel to the oblique ridge. Look along the ridge, cut away from your eye and toward your eye, and of course it'll come out perfect every time. Now in the lingual, we got a pretty damaged margin over here. So we got to go back and recreate the margin and then cut a new angle coming in. And if it's amalgam, we cut it in, change it until it's 90 degrees. Get the margin, get the angle, get the length. Now if you overextend, then obviously your clearance is going to be too much, but at least we're getting a clean margin and a 90-degree angle. Then we make a smooth curve to join the isthmus right here. So what I did is I just changed the entire occlusal outline.
Yeah.
Now you're ready to go gingerly. Okay,
And
but
purple flow.
well, it's too deep. You know, it would have been about up here, but get a little bit too deep, but that's not a huge thing. But the huge thing is you're having a horrible time trying to figure out how to go gingerly. Right? But you cannot go gingerly until you have a nice job on the occlusal outline. So now that the occlusal outline is done the way it needs to be done, given what we started with, now we have flat walls, 90-degree angles. Now we can find the corners of the box. Right about here. Again, make sure the burr is vertical. Come down that corner, come down that wall, make the corner and cut away from the wall.
It's slightly tilted, right? The burr is.
You had it kind of leaning mesily, it seems, which is unusual. So just keep the burr vertical all the time. Now that we've done the occlusal outline, put the burr against that wall that you made and then come vertically downward in the corner, cut away from that wall. Same thing over here. Put the burr where you want it axially, come drill a hole and cut away from that wall. So that gives you the shape of the axial wall. when you get the corners, but you can't get the corners until you have the occlusal outline done first. Can't do the gingival half of the wall until you do the occlusal half of the wall. Okay, so now once you get rid of the excess along the facial wall, lingual wall, and gingival, you'll probably have the clearance that you need and you'll be fine.
And what about the purple floor?
Well, it's a little bit deep, as I said, but it's not a disaster. If you'd been looking this direction and keep your eye on how tall the wall was when you were cutting here with the 330 burr, you could have controlled the pulpal depth a little bit better. Anyway, use this burr, get rid of the excess, facially, lingually, and gingivally, and we will have a prep that would work. Okay? So you had sort of given up on it because it wasn't ideal, it wasn't perfect, but I just showed you how to change it systematically so that it will actually serve the patient well. Okay? All right.